Hello, I'm Dr. Gary Blaine, pastor of the Highland Trinity United Church of Christ, and I'd like to share a story with you today. As a backdrop, it's just a few verses from Genesis chapter 37. This is the story of Joseph, and I'm going to take a look at the story from a different perspective, but this is the biblical background. Now, Joseph, of course, was very favored by his father Jacob, or Jacob in the Hebrew, and he was a pain in the butt, frankly. And so anyway, his dad sends him out to check on his brothers and to find out who they are, where they are, and how they're doing. And so he starts his way to find his brothers. And when Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" They have moved on from here," the man answered. I heard them say, "Let's go to Dothan." So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But when they saw him in the distance, and therefore before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him in with one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we will see what comes of his dreams." Now, just a note, the other translations, such as the Revised Standard Version, uses the word pit, and that's what I will be using in telling the story. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this pit in the desert. Don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way with them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the pit and sold him for 20 shekels. And then they took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then he got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine to see if it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And then Jacob tore his golden clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All of his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So that's the reading from the Bible, and I'd like to tell the story with a different slant. Reuben ben Jacob settled into the overstuffed armchair at the Sinai Psychotherapy Clinic. Across from him, in a Kennedy-style rocking chair, sat Dr. Daniel Schul, slowly and quietly drawing on his full bent Peterson pipe. The smoke wreathed his head, a perpetual cloud of undefined mystery. Reuben would recall that aroma of his tobacco for the rest of his life, nestling him in the sweet scent of safety. In their first session, Reuben shared with Dr. Schul that he was having difficulty sleeping at night, haunted by violent dreams. He was struggling to concentrate even on the tasks that he enjoyed, such as fishing. A bass could take hook, line, sinker, rod, and reel, and Reuben would not have even noticed. Withdrawn, fatigued, and anxious about nothing in particular, Reuben wanted relief from the sense of dread that followed him everywhere. Dr. Schul asked Reuben to share some of his earliest family memories. Reuben began, "Well, I remember meeting my Uncle Esau for the first time. He was a ruddy, weathered man. Esau was powerfully built and traveled to meet my father with 400 armed troops. But my father did not lead the procession, our procession, out to meet his brother, but rather sent our mothers, Leah and Rachel, with all of us children ahead. I was in the first group with my mother. Rachel and Joseph were safely in the last group. Dad was at the very end of the procession. There was great tension in the air, confused with dust and the noise of our flocks of sheep, goats, and cattle. I did not understand what was happening. I was afraid, especially of the soldiers. They were fiercely silent and grim-faced. They wore bright swords and carried long spears. Some had bows and arrows. This was not the family reunion I imagined. I was very frightened. Dr. Schul interrupted, "Reuben, what did you think of your father bringing up the very end of the line?" "I'm not sure," replied Reuben. I was the oldest son, but still quite young. Everything was hot, dusty, loud, confusing. I did not know what to think. I know that my father loved Rachel and her youngest son, Joseph, very much. It's just the way it was. Was there anything that surprised you about this event?" asked Dr. Schul. "Yes," answered Reuben. "I was surprised by my Uncle Esau. My dad always talked about Esau as if he was not very bright and a sucker for the easy way out. I knew there had always been tension between them. But when my father and Uncle Esau met, it was Esau who ran forward to greet us. He embraced my dad with tears and welcomed him home. He seemed kind of surprised that Dad had sent everyone ahead as if they were, some kind of peace offering or a prize to be had." Dr. Schul wondered aloud, a peace offering or a protective barrier? Reuben seemed stunned. "I never thought of that," he murmured. Dr. Schul picked up the thread of Joseph. "So tell me, Reuben, Joseph was not the youngest son, one would come later, but you said he was the most beloved by your father. And I know that fathers often favor a younger child, the youngest child, which in this time was Joseph. What do you think about that? Well, like I said, Reuben explained, Joseph was Rachel's youngest, and Rachel was the crown of Dad's heart. And when Joseph came around, Dad became suddenly alive and much more animated. Dad would coddle the boy, tell him how much he loved him. He tickled him and kissed him profusely. Every day, Dad was giving him presents, just little trinkets, maybe some candy or toys. Dad held Joseph on his lap and snuggled him. They would share a big mug of goat's milk and dunk sweet cakes in it together. Dad would smell Joseph's hair and linger in the aroma. When Joseph was old enough to sit at the table, Dad insisted that the boy sit next to him. Dad would serve Joseph before he helped his own plate. I remember when Joseph came of age, Dad ordered an expensive coat to be made for him. It was not like the rough brown or sand-colored coats that most of us wore. It was very fine material and radiated with bright colors and sequins. How'd you feel about that? Asked Dr. Schul. Oh, I did not mind so much, Reuben lied. As the oldest son, I knew that I would be left with Dad's property. It would be my inheritance to share as I willed. And by then I had a lot of responsibility for the flocks of sheep, goats, and cattle. Our ranch was thriving, covering thousands of acres in several counties. There was a lot of work to do, keeping up with gestation periods, milk and meat production, and feed to be provided when there was not enough pasture land. We were all pretty wealthy when you stop to think about it. None of us wanted for anything. Well, let's try this angle, persisted Dr. Schul. What do you think of Joseph as a boy or a teenager? Reuben shot back, I think he was an arrogant, spoiled brat. Dr. Schul took a long draw on his pipe and let the tide of blue smoke wander from his lips. Can you say some more about that? Well, just like Dad, answered Reuben slowly. Everything was about himself. He had to be the center of attention. Joseph was a braggart and concocted some of the wildest stories you ever heard of. He called them dreams. Once he said he had a dream where all of us were binding sheaves in the field. His sheaf rose up and all of ours gathered in a circle around his and bowed down before him. Well, you know that's poppycock. He never bound a sheaf in his life. Even Dad took offense at that. But that kind of stuff went on all the time, and, well, we resented him. I even thought to myself, man, my life sure would be easier if I didn't have him in the picture. Reuben continued, I thought I hated him, certainly. Resented him. Pondered Dr. Schul. Maybe like Esau and Jacob. a very long pause. I am wondering if you can tell me how you and your brothers dealt with Joseph. What did you do with all that anger? Reuben looked down at the floor. With great hesitation, he started, "Man, this is really hard. I don't know if I can tell it." "It's all right," assured Dr. Schul. "Everything that you tell me is confidential. I'm certainly not here to judge you. But my guess is, Reuben, that the darkness that seems to be sniffing around your life is a family matter. Maybe even a family secret, one that torments you." Reuben squirmed in his chair that now seemed suddenly hot and not so hospitable. Haltingly, he began, "Well, one day we were pasturing the sheep near Shechem. I'm not sure why, but Dad seemed to think that Joseph needed something to do. Maybe he was getting irritated and needed the kid out of the house for a while. So he sent him to us. Jacob told Joseph, 'Go check on your brothers and come back and tell me how they are doing.' Well, the dream boy got lost, of course, and had to ask for directions. By then we had moved on to other pastures near Dothan. Eventually he caught up with us, but not before we could see him coming. My brother said we should kill him and made ready to do so. But I couldn't go through with it. So I told them to throw him in a deep pit, one of the many sinkholes that pocked our land. My plan had been to pull him out myself and take him home. Take him home to Dad. All of my brothers agreed to this. So when we got near, we grabbed him and stripped him naked. He was shocked. Joseph thought it was some kind of a prank. "Come on, guys, knock it off," he yelled. When he found himself nude in a very deep hole, he realized it was no joke. After several hours, he began to get thirsty. He begged for water. Joseph wept. I had never heard him cry since he became a teenager. "Please," he pleaded. I finally couldn't stand it anymore. I made up an excuse of going to check on the animals and walked away from the camp. I was away for several hours, relieved to be removed from all that anger, chaos, and Joseph's sobbing. He had probably never felt real betrayal before in his life. Finally, I returned. The first thing I did was to check the hole he had been thrown into. And now I was shocked. It was empty. I walked up to the campfire that my brothers were sitting around. They were strangely quiet. Where's Joseph?" I asked. Still more silence. Finally, Judah said, "We sold him." There was nervous laughter all around the crackling logs. "Sold him?" I asked. "What do you mean you sold him?" Judah answered defiantly, "Well, you wouldn't let us kill him. So we sold him as a slave to a group of Midianites that were passing by. Got a better price than I thought we would for such a scrawny runt." My other brothers laughed, but only briefly as their eyes turned toward me. What am I going to tell Dad? I asked aloud. None of my brothers had thought of that. I was desperate. I noticed Joseph's fancy coat wadded up in the dirt. But strangely, it was in the same circle as the rest of us. It was as if Joseph was sitting there. The dream of the sheaves came to my mind. And then I got an idea. Quick, I commanded. Someone get a kid goat and bring it to me. Within just a few minutes, Levi brought the kid. I slit its throat and let the blood splatter all over Joseph's jacket. With my knife, I ripped and tore it, allowing more blood to splatter over the garment, and then dropped it in the dirt where it had once taken a place in our circle. I did not sleep well that night, trying to write a script in my head of what I was going to tell Father. On the way home the next day, I rehearsed it 100 times. When we got to the house, I walked into the front door. Dad's first question was, "Where's Joseph?" And then he looked at Joseph's coat, torn and matted with dry blood and dirt. I blurted out that Joseph had been attacked by some wild beast and was devoured. "I could not get close enough to save him, Dad. I'm sorry." I wept as I watched my father's knees buckle and he slumped to the floor. He ripped his own cloak and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for days. His eyes bulged out of their sockets of sorrow. They were bloodshot with grief. There was nothing we could do to console him. He said he wished he was dead. Well, you could have heard a tear hit the floor of Dr. Schul's office. Reuben had not realized that he had moved over to the large window of his office. He was looking out at the leaves that were gliding off the sycamore trees, the pretty co-eds trundling off to class, and the pigeons bobbing for seed on the sidewalk. He tamped down his tobacco and struck a match. Dr. Schul walked quietly back to his chair, smoke training behind him. "And so, Reuben," he began. For the first time in his life, Jacob could not talk, lie, or manipulate his way out of his limitations. His powerlessness, Jacob, your father. He had grasped the heel of his brother Esau on the day of their birth. He clutched and grabbed and held on to everything he ever desired. But the death of Joseph was beyond his control. It never occurred to him as he ran from his brother, wife after wife, child after child, flock after flock, clutching at every desire, could not thwart his destiny with death. Jacob sunk into a pit far deeper, darker, and drier than Joseph had fallen into on the day of his betrayal. And you, Reuben? How about you? Reuben thought a long space of silence. "No," he finally said, and I could not save him from either, nor Joseph, nor even myself. Dr. Schul wandered out of his office in a cloud of smoke. His words drifted behind him Ah, now you can begin to heal, Reuben. Now you can heal. Slowly, Reuben stood up and followed the doctor across the worn hardwood floors. As he opened the heavy doors of the behavioral science building, a blast of cold air slapped his face. He saw the blonde hair of one of the co-eds. Light shimmered off her head as the pigeons took flight. Thank you for sharing your time with me.